Welcome to the Trailblazers. I'm Perry Rarick, your host and chief editor of Follow Your Buyer. The purpose of this interview series is to share with you interesting discussions I have with trailblazing thought leaders. They're innovative, thought-provoking. They're not afraid to challenge the status quo, and they serve as vanguards for positive transformation. Returning for a second Trailblazer appearance is Heather Nielsen Sugrue. She is a highly accomplished sales and marketing executive in a most challenging space, B2B life sciences. Heather has had an extraordinary career. And that sounds like it's in the past tense. Heather is in the midst of an extraordinary career. She has served in increasing roles of difficulty. She is taking on more responsibility all the time, and that is in developing complex business relationships valued in the tens of millions of dollars. And there's a lot at stake because there are patients suffering from illness and disease who are waiting and hoping for a treatment. And now with the growth of cell and gene therapies, we're talking cures. Heather, welcome back to the Trailblazers.
Thank you so much, Perry. I'm so pleased to be back.
Well, the last time we met, you offered some really great, highly valuable insights on the challenging conditions that cell and gene therapy innovators, the drug sponsors, face, pressures from investors who have placed a lot of stock in their success, frequent and numerous M&As, still developing scientific know-how, and this fragmented landscape of capabilities across a growing number of contract development and manufacturing organizations that are all being relied on heavily to help advance innovative ideas through development and on to commercial production. And I think we concluded that this is a really daunting set of conditions that would make most human beings turn and run. However, you're leaning right into this. This is the world you live in. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, I'd like you to, if I can ask you to just summarize those conditions like you so aptly do. And has anything changed since we last spoke?
So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And I'll say kind of tongue in cheek, has anything changed in the last 2 weeks? There's probably another couple CDMOs that have just started up, would be my guess, in the cell and gene therapy space. And you kind of summarized really our conversation quite well just now, Perry, but really, from my perspective, getting involved in cell and gene, really knowing that I wanted to do this back in 21, as I highlighted in our last conversation, you look at the growth and the history of cell and gene, and it's been around, for 40 years. But the first thing I really noticed, and I mentioned this last time, was just the infancy of the industry itself. There's still a lot that's yet to be discovered. And so we're kind of stuck in this place of how do we scale? How do we get better potency? How do we get better yield to really go towards some of these higher indications that can be really lucrative and helpful for a larger number of people? So you take that past time and that past year and years of growth and build, and you kind of fast forward to the recent times, late teens, when I think cell and gene therapy started really getting an eye for, this is really where our medicine is going, personalized medicine. And these larger CDMOs got interested in them and wanted to expand the modalities into their bigger umbrella. And so they started to acquire some of these smaller companies. When these smaller companies come under larger organizations, there's a lot that can happen. I talked about the intimacy of the supply chain process and the functionality itself of gene therapy companies and cell therapy companies, and how they're so vastly different than oral solids and biologics. And you can't just push them into the same systems and processes. And so you have to kind of keep them separate. A lot of times that doesn't happen. So then you start to see attrition in some of these smaller companies that got acquired. And when you see attrition and people moving on to other companies, that's where we started to see some of the larger numbers of CDMOs that were being established, but with a diluted technical expertise, if you will. So the technical expertise became diluted over over the growth of this cell and gene therapies focused CDMO industry, and starts to, create just a different landscape of how clients then engage with CDMOs. And then, of course, there was COVID, which pushed it into another, high value perception of what this was. I think that the purchase of these smaller CDMOs, I mentioned last time, were very, maybe bought at 10 times their value. So there was this perception of an overvalued market space that people really wanted to get into, hence the VCs and private equity firms. But then COVID also gave that perception with the billions of vaccines that had to be created to save the world, for COVID. And there were some CDMOs that made very good money based on that and were growing in the 70 percentile, and then you get past that, and we're now at this COVID cliff aspect of things where that growth isn't the same, but there's a perception of the momentum behind cell and gene therapy is also needs to continue or can continue in that way. And so it starts to create this dynamic of confusion, I think, for how do clients engage with CDMOs, and CDMOs, how do they build themselves to be successful? And then the last piece of all of that, when you start to see the growth of the CDMOs, and I think I highlighted numbers and I rechecked them this morning, there's, it was in about fall of 2020 or spring of 23 when I heard the number about 150 CDMOs. By the time fall came in 2023, there was about 180, nearly 200. And then early 24, that number was about 240. And, I think I've heard numbers now around 300. So, it's kind of saying tongue in cheek the last couple of weeks, maybe there's a couple new CDMOs. It's probably true, to be honest with you, right? Because there still is a growth there. The tipping point hasn't really occurred. But the problem with that too is that it's very fragmented, and you commented on that as well. And when you have that fragmentation, you have to start looking at, if one company does something really well, then you've got tech transfer, you've got cost, you've got time, and that really muddies the waters as well, and makes it a lot more convoluted for clients to be able to engage and progress their programs through, working with these CDMOs. So I hope that was a good enough picture, but that's how I saw sort of the progression as I started getting involved in cell and gene therapy.
That's so clear. You do such a great job of explaining all that. But I will tell you, I think I lost count. We got into the double digits of challenges that we're facing in this industry, and I stopped counting. So I know we're beyond that. This takes a special type of person, because I think most people would say, "My gosh, where's the business in this? Who would volunteer to get involved in this?" You always remind me about the patient, though. Every time we talk, you talk about the patient, and I think that's what makes it worthwhile.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Always has been for me in drug development in particular. But when you talk about cell and gene therapy, you said it earlier, you're curing and not just treating. And that is magic. It's unbelievable. And the industry has come so far, and we're getting closer to being able to, be very impactful to a larger number of people in that space. But that's why it's so important that these CDMOs work well to be able to support the sponsors who are developing these drugs to try to get them to market.
Over the discussions we've had, that's one thing I've recognized in you is you operate with a high level of empathy, whether it's for the people you work with closely, that you've worked with clients, CDMOs, with patients. You have this high level of empathy. And you shared with me some of the conversations you've had with clients when, from a CDMO perspective, and how these drug sponsors are feeling. I think you talked about, you threw out some terms of confusion, a little uncertainty. Can you share that set of insights with our listeners?
Absolutely. And I think the word I used last time was terrified, because the growth of number of CDMOs that are out there. And I was thinking about this a little bit more since our last conversation. And I kind of have now bucketed them into two different categories when you talk about sponsors who are looking for support. Those companies who have been here for 40 years, are very focused on cell and gene therapy, very well versed, understand the technology, and are trying to drive innovative, medicines to cure patients, had been working with these smaller CDMOs. And as you started seeing this momentum that we just talked about with larger CDMOs wanting to get those modalities under their umbrella, it sort of breaks that momentum a little bit about how that company works. Smaller companies work very more closely together than larger companies. I mean, that's just kind of common sense of how it works. And so these clients who had been engaging with some of these smaller CDMOs now all of a sudden have to rethink their approach, because they're not working with the same company they were working with before. There may be same scientists there, but it's not under the same umbrella of an organization. So two things: you either follow your scientists, you become very well connected with and they know your technology and they know what they're doing and being able to help support your gene therapy or your cell therapy program, or you stay with a company that was acquired and you try to make it work, but you've got to rethink how you engage with that CDMO, because it's a whole different way of doing it when you're talking to a larger CDMO versus a smaller one. So there's those clients that are there are those clients that are running into those types of challenges. And then you've just got new people who are getting into cell and gene therapy who may not have the background and expertise, but are interested in it, want to get involved in it, get excited about it, are passionate about it as well, but may not have the level of understanding or depth of knowledge. So they look to CDMOs to help support from a scientific perspective as well. Similar challenge, though, is how do you gauge that? How do you, what kind of questions do you ask to make sure that they're firmly aware and have the technical expertise to help support your programs? And when you talk about the dilution of the technology and of the know-how that's out there, that could become a problem, because somebody might, be in a position to help support, but might not have, all of the background to help support for longer term. Or another statistic I think I threw out last time when we spoke was a lot of the people who have come into the cell and gene therapy, 90% of those are from biologics. And again, biologics is close to, but not exactly cell therapy or gene therapy, right? So there's that piece of it. And the last part that I want to say also that's a challenge is that with the increased number of CDMOs that are out there, they call themselves cell and gene therapy CDMOs. But cell therapy is not gene therapy, and vice versa, right? They always are clumped together. And I may have commented on that last time we spoke, but they're different. And you can put your market material out there and you can talk to clients as if we're a cell and gene therapy, and you may even have the equipment to support both. But the technical know-how and the people that you have there may not. And it's this concept of let's just bring anything in to be able to support and get some clients in the door. Well, if you happen to be a cell therapy client that comes in and you win that program, but they're really more well-versed from a technical perspective of the people who, the scientists and the subject matter experts are more leaning towards gene therapy, it's not an easy switch. You can't just switch gene therapy scientists to cell therapy scientists or vice versa. And that's another thing that I think a lot of people are confused about. When I say a lot of people, it's more in the CDMO space of establishing their experience, because you can't be both unless you intentionally try to build both equipment and personnel, and they're not interchangeable. And that I think is a misperception, and that then sponsors get caught up in and can potentially be falsely led to a partnership that may not truly have been the best fit for them.
You raised so many valuable points. As you describe, this is where my mind was going as you were describing that client and, kind of what's going on in their minds and how they're feeling. The different and different types of clients. They're not all the same. So very good point you made, a great qualifier. This is our target audience from a CDMO perspective. This is our target audience. They are not going to be well served with a list of features and benefits all in a bullet format. This is a different type of outreach and engagement.
So you talk about the target audience, and honestly, Perry, and I think we're going to focus on this a little bit, but really it's the client, right? And it's a more intimate relationship, because they shouldn't just be targets. Yes, they bring us in clients that are tied to bookings that are turned into revenue, and it's how companies grow. But you're still working with partnership relationships that you want to have a strong connection to, and that intimacy piece that I just feel that's the right word, especially when you talk about cell and gene therapy. So really, it's clients. Yes, they're our target audience, but those clients have special needs, and those special needs in the different areas have to be understood by the CDMO, and you can't just bring them in and say, we'll make it work. There needs to be a specified, specific, we can do this, I know we can because of X, Y, and Z, and here's what we're going to do to help support you.
Yeah, very good. I just it causes my mind to go in so many different directions and think about this world that we're part of. So some of the listeners, if they're part of marketing and sales, the business development operations, or even the executive leadership in a CDMO, are saying, wow, I don't think we look anything like what could stand up to the kind of challenges that you're talking about, that you're stating. However, you shared with me a really interesting framework, and that's what I'd like you to talk about and share with listeners now. So, essentially, and I'm convinced, in about 100 days, a CDMO could take themselves from zero or whatever their current state is to the kind of organization that can meet the challenges that you're talking about and actually have great success and growth in these conditions. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Talk about this. You have four really interesting foundational components or lenses in which you kind of look at a CDMO and the organization. So what are they and what do they mean?
So one thing I'm going to just correct, that yes, 100 days, I've kind of constructed this approach to say these are things that can happen to really get people driving in the right direction. And within cell and gene therapy, and I'm going to obviously just focus on that particular modality, you want, the way I always envision it, everybody rowing in the same direction, right? And in 100 days, it's really building the appropriate foundational strength and setting up the company to be able to grow successfully. The sales cycle of these things are long, and that's another misperception, I think, by the investors, and even sometimes people in the C-suite, that it takes a very long time to engage in a client and to bring in, a potential opportunity. So these things that we'll talk about right now are really building a foundation for success, for that future success, and getting people driving in the right direction. And so there's four things that I shared, right? One is about people, the second is about process, the third is clients, and the fourth is technical. And I'm actually going to mix them up based on what you and I spoke last, because again, I thought through this a little bit. But one thing I do want to say is that this concept of people, process, clients, technical, I'm going to thank Monty Bowie for that. And he and I worked together back, and this goes back to our Patheon days. We would share, territory plans and how we were going to move forward and things of that sort. And this came from him, and I really liked the concept of it. And it's really it's what I've built my foundational beliefs and leadership skills and what I bring to my philosophy of supporting a client through the years. So thank you, Monty, who is also an exceptional leader, and he's a fantastic person. So you talk about people, right? So people, it's the people within the organization. And I think one of the biggest misperceptions when you look at a CDMO is that sales falls all on business development. That if the sales is failing, it's because BD aren't doing their job. And I think this is the one of the biggest misperceptions, and the one that's most personal to me, because yes, BD are on the front line and they have to bring in the clients and they need to engage with the right people and they need to find the opportunity. But the people aspect of it is truly everybody selling, from the C-suite people to help support on that level when you want that level of engagement, to the scientific subject matter experts that really need to sell themselves, because we're not selling a product, we're selling a service, a person's technical know-how, an expertise, ability to be able to support a very scientifically, complex program. And so you're selling those people, and they need to be engaged in that process. So when I first look at a company, I want to look at, yes, the BD. How are they engaging? What do they have in place? What types of approaches are they doing? What kind of prospecting tools are they using? And I'll put a little shout out to Zymewire again, because I think that's the best BD prospecting tool that's out there. But what kind of CRM are they using? How are they managing their opportunities? How are they engaging in their clients? What kind of research are they doing with their clients before they actually reach out? But then the next piece to that is, how are they engaged to the internal folks? How are they engaging with the subject matter experts, and what are their relationships there? What kind of systems do they have in place to have those types of conversations and learning moments for the BDs to become more coherent and understanding about what they need to communicate with their clients? And then, you look at marketing, is marketing generating the appropriate material for the BD to use in the field? And I'll go back to what I'm sure I said last time is, the BD need to sell what the operational folks are doing, and the operational folks need to do what the BD are selling. And the collateral for that comes from marketing. So there's got to be collaboration amongst those three groups to be able to put the right collateral and have the right conversations with those potential clients. And then when you, again, look at it holistically, it's making sure that there are all of that understanding, and even finance. How are we costing our programs out internally? And do BD understand that about where our pricing is? And so there has to be a people connection with the BD and finance to just really understand and make sure that we're making the right decisions, and we're thinking through the right pricing strategies and approaching all of that in the right way. So it's looking at the holistic group within an organization, and it's much easier with a smaller company to do this with, right? It's feasible in a larger company, but it has to be proactive. It has to be forward thinking. It has to be intentional. And you have to break down any kind of silos and make sure those types of conversations are going on. And that then leads into the process. But I'll pause for a moment. Does that make sense of what I'm
does.
saying?
It's this is so good. This is the meat of the discussion, and I really love this. I'm going to geek out a little bit on this. So I want to just remind the listeners, this is holistic. It's not linear. It's we've got these four foundational pieces that you stated. People, process, client, and technical, but they're all happening simultaneously. But we're going to take them apart, because I want to do a little deeper dive into these, and I may not even start in the right spot. But when I talk to a lot of salespeople, they talk about people, and they're talking about their people, the sales team. What are their skills? What's their territory? Okay. And they don't get much beyond that. Okay. When I talk to the marketers, they kind of, I'm painting it a little ugly, but I've been in these shoes. I've done this very thing. And so I'm part of this problem as well. And when they talk about client, or what they will say target audience, but I really like the fact that you say client, they talk about target audience, and they kind of do a little superficial, some terms, some titles, the types of companies they're in. But I want to start with client. You go a lot deeper. This is like a deep, empathetic understanding of who your clients are. Am I getting that right? And what are some of the key features of doing that well?
So yes, the client piece is hugely important. And one of the things that I look at, and that needs to be looked at when you're talking about the people aspect and the BD and what are they doing, is about the market analysis and understanding, okay, where is potential based on what you do? And that's where all of these things are connected. Because even, let me just pick something out of the technical piece of my bucket, of one of my lenses, right? are we technically positioning ourselves with the expertise that's actually there, right? Back to my comment of cell therapy and gene therapy, and a lot of times, oh, we're cell and gene, but really, are you? You may be based on your equipment, but are you based on your technical expertise, or vice versa, right? So really understanding what is the technical foundation of what you're positioning from a service offering has to be established, right? Then as you build your territories and alignments through that market analysis, and that's what the BD take, then it's the next level of doing their research, of looking into these companies, because not every company is going to align with the expertise that you have internally. You can't just throw out a wide net, bring in 100 companies and assume you can, manage 90 of them. And that may have been, with the larger CDMOs that represent multiple modalities. But if you're focusing specifically on cell therapy or gene therapy or both, there's a finite number of potential clients that are out there. So it's defining who they are, and then it's really researching them so that when you do reach out, there's a level of engagement and understanding and appreciation of where they are in their research that might gain you more entrance into a conversation versus somebody who's just throwing out a cold email, hey, I see you're doing cell and gene, can I talk to you? And do what we call in BD the show up and throw up. Let me just show you all my features and benefits, right? And I think the BD are smarter than that, in this space. And there is, a very focused conversation that needs to be had. But you want to respect the fact that the fit is there for what you do within your company, and that these engagements that you're having with your potential clients are robust and meaningful. And the other thing I'll comment on here too that's different from my past is the need for these subject matter experts to be there in some of these early conversations, because it is very technical, it is very comprehensive and different, right? And so having your subject matter experts there, and having the client or sponsor recognize, okay, oh yeah, that expertise is there through these conversations, back to an earlier comment of, you never know, and engaging that early, just as a couple things, it gives the confidence to the client that you'd be a good partner. It shows your internal capabilities, from a very real perspective of the fit for that person. And or you can tell right away that, what, this isn't going to be a fit. I really appreciate your time and thank you for the consideration. You might want to look at company XYZ that I think has a better fit for your needs.
So this is so good. I really like this, and the interdependence of all of these functions and these lenses that you're looking things. So I'm going to jump around a little bit, and
That's fine.
I may get lost, but I know you won't. So one of the things you highlighted to me in a previous conversation is initially how important it is to speak to other departments when this is in your people lens, speak to other departments to understand the business development engagement with those other departments. You mentioned it a little bit, but how do you do that? And why is it important? How do you do it? And what are you trying to understand?
Yeah. So it's about trying to get visibility across all the departments and understanding. And I like using the word respect and appreciation of what the others are doing. And a really good example of that is RFP to proposal process. And that's where the process piece starts to come in, right? The process piece connects these things that we're talking about, right? So under process, there's an RFP to proposal process. So myself as a BD, I engage in a client because I've done my research. I know 80% that we'll be able to support them. We have this discussion with a subject matter expert, and they're a good fit. And so we're able to get an RFP from them, a request for proposal. And what do I now do with that, right? So we have to have a proposal written. So ideally, you have an internal proposal group. So what happens in that? It's not just about a BD throwing it over the fence and then 2 weeks later getting a proposal. There's a lot that goes into the build of that proposal, where the proposal writer collaborates with the subject matter experts in development and analytical and quality, and making sure that what we're representing is doable, that we can actually meet their scope of work. And then the BD wants to really understand that proposal. So when they own it and present it to the client, there's that level of understanding that there is a connection and we've met their need. Right. So, but if you don't have that appreciation, I think things get taken for granted. I've had, and I've seen this in my past. I'll say I've been lucky enough to not have any that I've led. But often, external BDs will look at internal folks as their admins. We just get it done, and there's just not a sense of what has to happen and what's happening behind the scenes to get some of these things done. So I think opening up the windows and seeing the visibility around that is just so important, because it shows how the whole system works. And again, the intimacy of where those things need to be connected, and then allows valuation of your position, valuation of yourself in the whole process, and then appreciation of why you then want to maybe support somebody in need if they need something, and you know the information to help support in that area. You can help each other. So in that, again, that then drives down to culture, right? I mean, that then drives a positive culture from my perspective. So that's the reasoning is that how to, I think, was part of the question too. When I started at a company, after leaving Patheon, I was with Patheon for quite a lot of time. And they didn't really know the CDMO world. But they had been a CDMO for 3 years. So what I ended up doing is doing a lunch and learn for each of the different departments. And in that conversation, it was showing them slides that have been created as to how we're presenting to our clients, what we're presenting to our clients, and what the importance was of each slide. And one side would come up around development. And like this, you folks, development folks, that was the group I was speaking to at the moment. Here's the importance of you. Here's why you're important and what you're doing for these clients and what they see and how we're representing you to potential clients. And taking off their blinders, perhaps, and recognizing their one piece of the full process of a drug development. And then talking to analytical, who can have blinders on. I'm just going to, inject this into the HPLC and I'll read the results and we'll move on. But they're the backbone of the whole program, because if development needs to know that they have what they have, and that's what analytical does. So it's just opening up conversation and giving awareness of what each of these different departments are doing and the importance of them. And coming from business development, that just allows that bridge of communication that I use that term often to all of the different departments, and making sure then that's happening internally as well.
You paint a picture of collaboration that's really admirable, and it's complex. It's hard to do. You can't build that overnight. You can't do,
No.
That's not an ad hoc reaction to a request for proposal.
Right. No,
Yeah.
it's not. And that's why it's, first of all, building it out and seeing what needs to be done and understanding all the different aspects that come into it. And then bring all the people that touch that to read the standard operating procedure of that approach, understand what their roles and responsibilities are of not only themselves, but others, so that you get the full, there's a word I'm looking for and I can't think of it, but just the full scope, I guess, of what goes into this proposal process. And then that's when you start building, again, the appreciation, the respect, the understanding of what's happening in generating a proposal, from the BD side to the subject matter expert, to the proposal, to the project manager, to finance from a pricing perspective. They're all involved.
Yeah, right. So now you brought up something which I wanted to ask about more, but you also mentioned the art. So if that request, developing the proposal, getting an RFP, developing and developing the proposal, and that's done well. That sets up onboarding.
Yes.
So that's done well. You're bringing your SMEs. And so what you're talking about is, as needed, you bring in these subject matter experts, and they know they're going to be needed if you do this right and set this collaborative and cultural environment up well. But it's not just a feel-good thing. This is vital to the outcomes for the business.
I believe so. And you actually just brought up a really good comment when you said onboarding of where, project management is so important in a company because they need to be able to drive a project once it comes in. And so the passing of the baton, if you will, right, of the baton being our client that we've so, graciously and cautiously and have grown this relationship and partnership. From the BD perspective, we need to pass that along to the project manager once that's won. And that process has to be a process. It can't just be, okay, here they are, but you have an internal, kind of transition meeting where the PM comes and the subject matter experts come and the BD comes and say, okay, this is the technology, this is what they're looking for, this is what the client is kind of like. When they come on board, they're vegetarian, so you might want to, you could tee things up to be to create that strong partnership, just because of what knowledgeably, not just about the science, but about the person. They're sticklers for making sure that everything is in order. They want an agenda whenever they come on, whatever the case may be, right? It's transitioning that information to the project manager who then owns that. And so it is a very intricate web, if you will, right, of making sure that these things are in place and being proactively putting them there, because a lot of these companies are very young and they haven't quite gotten there yet. Then, you can proactively put them there, then that this is the process and what needs to happen for when a client gets signed and we're bringing them on. And then that's the feel good that they need, because, you don't want to, and again, where the BD, what they're saying and how they're representing the company, internal folks need to know that so that they can then execute against that. We want to partner, we treat your project like it's our own. We are an extension of your scientific hands. We are collaborative, we are responsive, we, will provide data for you, in a timely manner. All of these things we then have to execute against and meet that client need, because that's what they've heard the company is. And again, I think that's sometimes where a few things may fall short, because you don't have those systems in place yet. And you can't, and that's when you get into the process of building the plane while you're flying it.
So challenging. Yeah, you bring up so many great points. We'll try to work through some more of these because I have so many more questions. Something else. So something else that you highlight in this process is a pricing strategy, a cost book and a pricing strategy. And that's not something you want to do ad hoc or shoot from the hip on. This is something that's well thought out. Can you talk a little bit about that? What are they? How do you know you have a good pricing strategy? How do you recognize one? And how do you go about developing one if you don't have one?
Such a good question, because what I have learned in my time is that this is often a piece that's missing. And a lot of times for smaller CDMOs, because building, and there's a difference, right? So you're talking about price strategy, but it starts with the cost book and the cost strategy of understanding what it costs to do these services. And that's a very complex spreadsheet, if you will, that is tracks and understands all of the services that you do, the assays that you run, the processes of the scalability, a 2-liter, a 10-liter, whatever it is that you're working on from a process perspective. All of that has to be brought into a cost book that says how many hours does it take, what are the materials, what is the time, what is the hands-on from an FTE perspective, and then what's the overhead that gets built into that, from the costing of your people to the costing of running the overall facility. And it's a complex process of building your cost book, which generates your revenue understanding. All a price book is throwing a gross margin on top of that, and then pricing the project to your client based on, you know, what your cost is internally, so that you're turning a profit. To not have that understanding in place, then you're just shooting in the dark the whole time. You know, you can be being competitive by somebody saying, you know, you're X amount of dollars or percentage over, okay, we'll just meet that cost. When in reality, you might just be losing money on that, because your cost structure to execute on that particular program is here, but you're pricing it here and you're going to lose money, right? So there's that. But and the difficulty of that too is you don't have historical data to build it, right? So sometimes you have to just start at, okay, what is your estimate of how many hours does it take to do this particular assay? What are the reagent costs? That's pretty much straightforward, you know, but then what are the hours and the hands-on? But it's also understanding it's the hands-on, not just the time from beginning to end. And I'll do an analogy to kind of make sense of that. And somebody used this to me, actually, it was a gentleman by the name of Doug Stark, who is exceptional in this area. And he said, you know, when you hire a plumber to come in and check out your sink because it's broken, and he comes in and he looks at it and he says, yeah, actually, I need this piece, but I don't have it, so I need to go get it. And he was there for an hour. So then he leaves and he goes and gets the part, and he comes back 2 days later and he fixes it, and it takes him an hour. Well, he's going to should charge you 2 hours, because he was there for 2 hours and the cost of the material and whatever his labor cost is, right? He wouldn't charge or shouldn't charge 48 hours, because he says he was there and then he didn't finish it until 2 days later. And that's sometimes a difficult thing to understand when you're talking about very intricate assays or processes that have people coming and going, and, you know, how do you really build that out? So it really is complex, to be fair, but it's such a necessity, because it's the baseline, it's the foundation of understanding your revenue trail. And the book to bill process, when I book, how long does it take me to get my revenue? Because one assay or one service, you know, might only take 3 months that you'll recognize the revenue of that booking, where some might take 18 months sometimes, where I booked this particular program at this dollar value, but it's not going to be fully executed, and I'm invoicing on a month to month as we're executing, but I won't get that full value until I finish, which is 18 months down the road. And just that understanding that there's a lag in bookings to revenue and all of that, you know, that's the important foundational piece that when I spoke to Doug Stark, who I have a high level of respect for and appreciation, because I think he really understands this industry, you know, there's a high percentage of people who don't have that, or have a very simplistic model that doesn't quite work as good as it should, right? And so then again, to circle back to the comment about pricing is important to the BD, and you want to try to be competitive. Market intelligence on pricing is always difficult to figure out. It just is. And so you kind of have to play around with that a little bit. A lot of CDMOs will just say, again, we'll bring it in, whatever, we'll be competitive, we'll be 10% under your lowest costs. You know, that does a couple of things. It might devalue or a perception of, you know, you don't really value your scientists and your internal, you know, you're just kind of bringing anything in, you know, or why'd you charge me that much to begin with? I mean, there's all these, you know, kind of mind things that kind of, you have to think about where the client's coming from. But at the end of the day, you want to make money. You want to make a margin. So to understand the foundational piece, and then to be realistic about, you know, where can we be from a gross margin perspective to engage in some of these clients, and keep them there, right? And that's the big thing too, is keeping them there, executing, doing what you say you can do, so that they want to continue with you through their program. Or if a BD has done their job, they actually know these clients have a pipeline and they're going to bring in other programs, and you've just shared with them or proven to them that you can do this quite well, that you're cost effective, that you're doing everything that the BD said you could do, and let's give you another asset to help support us on.
Such an important function that you're speaking about. So you said this is missing a lot. This is a big missing piece in a lot of CDMOs. How do you go about? So do you sit down with all the key stakeholders and go through a drill? a series of drills and say, okay, here's the RFP, and you walk it through all of this and figure out the cost and create, how does that happen?
And it is exactly that. One is bringing somebody in who really understands what the cost book structure needs to look like and has that experience and background. Hence, the gentleman I referenced earlier. And, so he helped that process, but it is bringing in each of the different divisions, bringing in development, bringing in analytical, bringing in quality control, and saying, through all of this, and you got to think of everything, right? What's the pre-work of setting the client up? You have to get them into the system. You've got to set them up for invoicing. You've got to give them a number. You've got to do all these things from an internal computer onboarding piece. And then you're looking at their scope of work. So then you're sitting down and you're talking through, okay, how are we going to execute this? And then you're talking, okay, what's the time on the equipment and how long does that particular assay take and what are the materials cost? And so it is really sitting down and talking through each of these different aspects with the company or with divisions or departments within the company and the key stakeholders to define this. And it gets built into this very large Excel spreadsheet that talks to itself, right? That can summarize everything on the front end of the proposal. Again, if you're doing it right and working with somebody who knows what they're doing, so that at the end of the day, you have a summary sheet of all of this input that allows you to, again, to put the margin on and give you a price. But it's a laborious process. It becomes less laborious once you have historical data, right? And it also becomes more fine-tuned and more realistic as you continue to grow and bring your data in to better enhance those numbers that you put in. For instance, that assay takes me 5 hours. Well, you've been able to build in some efficiencies, and it actually takes me now 3 hours. So you've been overcharging in that area, and now you can better tweak it. Or on the flip side, oh yeah, I can get that done in 2 hours was the assumption, and it actually takes 10 hours. And it's like, oh, okay, well, we're actually really undercharging there, so we need to bump that up and make sure that we're getting the money that we deserve to execute on that particular service. So it's a laborious, all-inclusive process, that needs to take place to do it. I'll say in my experience, it took about a month and a half. So it's not something that takes forever. But if you've got the right mindset, the drive, the responsiveness, and all of that, it can be done fairly quickly. But again, the necessity is just so high of a priority because it's one of the key foundational pieces to building that level of success for the long-term process.
So hard, but so valuable. Really
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah.
I want to go back over to clients. See, we're jumping all around here. And so something that you had mentioned related to clients that really got my attention. Discuss high probability opportunities and determine what additional support and assistance is needed to engage this prospect. So how do you go about that? How do you determine a high probability opportunity?
So that's where it comes into opportunity management, right? So when I talked earlier, what's the contract relation management program that the company's using? Is it typically Salesforce.com? That's the best known out there, but is it Zoho? Is it something else? And you're managing these opportunities through your pipeline. And high probability means that you're engaging with this client. The fit is there. We know we can support them. We're negotiating maybe around pricing and that type of thing. But we did all our homework early on to really understand that this is a good client for us, and we really want to partner with them, and we really want to engage and have them be one of our core companies to partner with. And so that's when all hands are on deck. Right. And again, this is where it comes down to, it's not just on the BD, this is on the company as a whole. So they have some concern about some of the technical stuff maybe that we spoke about. And so we need to maybe provide some data to them. And so when I talk about, okay, let's look at these high probability, that might be the job of the VP for business development, which is, has always been my role in the past. Okay, let's look at these opportunities. This is a high probability. We know we can bring this in. Okay, let's brainstorm and say, what do we need? Well, we need to get some extra data, or we need to pull the data out and provide it to the client and have the subject matter expert talk through to, build some credibility and build the what's the word I'm looking for, to confirm for the client, that, okay, get rid of their concern. And then maybe it's where's the company long term? You've only been here for a couple of years, and I want to continue. Most companies do want to continue into clinical programs and potentially commercialization. What's your financial stability? So that's when you might want to bring in your CEO or your CFO to talk about, how we're established, where our money's come from, that we are focusing on long term, and what we're doing to continue to engage in other investors, or to keep our financial stability there, that we are going to be there longer term. It may be that I really am concerned about my project manager. I want to make sure that I've got the right person to help drive the communication process, because that, again, as I mentioned, that particular role is so very important, because they are the center liaison for all of it, right? And so it's engaging, or possibly even providing the bios of the various PMs that are there, so that they can select or even interview what's the better fit. Because sometimes the best person might not be the right fit just personality wise. We're all people, we all have our different ways of doing things, and you want to make sure that you've got the right level of connection with somebody to be able to partner for a long term. Because again, these programs are not done in a week, or this isn't just we're buying 100 of these and let's ship them to you. This is a long-term relationship that you want to have the right people in place. So that's what that particular part of it, that piece of it means. And that particular portion more relates to the internal, like, what do we need to do, huddle together to win this client, because we really care about their work, know that we have the scope of work and ability to execute for them. So what's missing and what do we need to do? And that comes to the BD of understanding and recognizing, but everybody huddling and coming to the table to throw their strengths on the table to help support bringing this client over the line, if you will, to come in as one of our clients.
So I want to also ask you about this. This is, I'm trying to stick with these functions, but they're all interrelated. So and
then they say, Perry, they so are, right. And I'm revisioning. I know what you're looking at, and I'm looking at the same thing because it's what I shared, right. But I'm looking at this. It's circular, right. And I talked about building the web. It's circular because there's an arrow in both directions between all of them, but there's also an arrow in every direction amongst the four of them, right. And they all have to be, and that's why it has to be intentional and proactively looked at and driven by process that is proactively thought of and implemented, so it's true. So bouncing over from my perspective makes sense, because that's how it is.
Okay. All right. So we're aligned in our thinking about this, I guess. I want to talk about when something goes wrong. How do you set that up to be handled well? Because, how are you looking through your lenses at that capability? Who drives it? Are you relying on the culture and personality of the drug sponsor, or does the CDMO, the service provider, kind of take the lead on that in establishing when something needs to be notified, or it needs to be communicated in an emergency kind of way? How do you set yourself up to do that well?
Yeah, that is such an important one, and often is a miss from my perspective, but so important, because it goes to the baseline of what you're saying to the client, that we're an extension of your scientists and your arms. We're a partner, we're collaborative, we're transparent, we want to support you, we want you to be successful. So if becomes a problem in the process. And science is science. And this is what I always say to a client, because often if a client sees the problem in a client PM interaction, or when they have weekly or biweekly calls, they'll often go to the BD and say, oh my God, I'm concerned. You know, again, that's why the BD needs to stay plugged in as well, because they're part of that team, overall team. But when a problem does occur, which comes up internally, number one, it's making sure that that's communicated on these client calls, right? Often what might happen is, well, let's try and fix it, because we can fix it and it can not be a problem. And then we can just not have to worry about it. Well, again, science is science, and it may not be an easy fix. And what they're not made, they, and when I'm saying they, is our internal folks, the internal folks of the CDMO, isn't being putting the shoe on the other foot, right? And looking at the client and not know that they have a board meeting at the end of the month, and they've been asked to present this data that now is being, is in danger of potentially going forward because of a mistake or an issue. If they don't know that, then they can't prepare how they're going to communicate to their board. And if they find out on the last day, then that puts them into a very precarious position of, how do I now manage this discussion? Because that might be a very important one, a milestone, that they get their next tranche of money. So this collaboration and the transparency is just so important in sharing that with them, because mistakes happen. People are human. Science is science. Sometimes we think something's going to work and it doesn't quite do it the way we think it is. And if you communicate that, and then they become part of the solution with the CDMO, that's the collaboration portion that comes in. That's the transparency piece that comes in. And they may, in their research, if this is a well-established gene therapy company, have run into that problem and already have the solution for you, and forgot to maybe provide it to you earlier, or warned you of it or something, right? So you never know, and one shouldn't be embarrassed or concerned about an issue or a mistake, because it's just about communicating it to make sure it moves forward. And that often is the answer, I think, in all of our issues that come up, is the communication process and just being honest. But the other piece to this too, again, is just putting the shoe on the other foot, and putting yourself in the client's perspective, and say, okay, what are they up against? What do we know, they need to do? And maybe even just ask those questions, to understand the severity of, if we take a week to see if we can fix this. If, the client's in a position that they don't have a board meeting at the end of the month or whatever, bottom line, from my perspective, it's putting it on the table and bringing the solution to the client, bringing the problem so that you can problem solve together. But, there are other ways of just that communication can help guide the next step, basically.
I think you told me in one of our previous conversations that effective communications can solve so many problems.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah. Another thing, when I think about this holistically, is that this is not a static, okay, let's fix a bunch of things, put it in place, and forget. This is about continuous improvement, refining, even to the point where there's professional development going on with the BD team.
So yes, absolutely. And that kind of falls into the technical piece of it. And I talked earlier, technical, first and foremost, is just understanding what is your technical expertise internally and what are we selling, right? But once you have that, then, having continuous training, improvement, collaborations with your internal folks does many things. One, it educates. Two, it allows a level of communication for the BD to communicate internally. Maybe the BD is running into a lot of LVV technology and clients who are working in that space, but their company only works more on the adenoviral, right? And so bringing in and having an understanding about what are the BDs seeing in the market that might be able to expand from a technical perspective. It allows for the technical people to understand and ask questions about what's happening outside. So the technical portion of it is an ever churning piece, right? And from my perspective, the word perfect shouldn't exist. Practice and training makes better, always better, right? So you can always get better. So that there should be a cadence there of that, right? And that spills into the process, building the process to make sure those types of things are happening. So what is the process? Once a month, we do a technical training that we ask somebody in the development, somebody in the analytical to, train us, because we've just taken a poll on the BD side and we really want to know ultracentrifugation and what's the impact of that from the analytical perspective. So help us understand that better, or what kind of questions are we getting in the field that we keep stumbling on and we really don't know. Okay, well, let's go internally and find out who can train us on that, right? So it's building the process to have a cadence to continue that technical, education and growing of one's understanding of the business.
So I'm going to go back to, I had you talk about these conditions, these challenging conditions that we now face. I said, had anything changed since we last spoke? And there are probably a couple more CDMOs that were created in the last week or two. So that's another component of this framework that you're talking about. You can't, or most of what we're talking about, other than the clients, has been internal, but you have to keep an eye on the landscape, the market analysis, the landscape, what you like to refer to as a condition, as a situational analysis. I really like that term, but there's a competitive analysis that's part of that too. Can you talk a little bit about how do you do all this and then kind of still keep an eye on what's going on around you that may change your business, right?
Yes, so that is a big part of it as well, right? There's the situation analysis and taking a look at what are all the different aspects out there impacting. The CDMO number does continue to increase, and that surprises me. I really feel like there should be and needs to be a tipping point where either the fragmentation starts to come together, where you see acquisitions and companies coming together to try to fit more of the process under one company. Or they're just going to fall away because they can't be competitive. Because the reality, again, of this industry is that it's young. And the number I think I used before, and I'm sure it's changed and different, but there are 17 commercial programs for gene therapy out there, but there are only a couple CDMOs that actually support that. So do these CDMOs actually focus on early development in analytical, or are they built out for phase 3 and commercial? If they're built out for the latter, then they're spending a lot of money over a period of time until they can actually get an asset at that point. And so there's a finite number, of assets that are under development. There's more in cell therapy. It's been around, and I think there's more momentum there than there is in gene therapy. But the truth of the matter is that as the number of CDMOs grow, they're all competing for the same assets. And it muddies the water and confuses the landscape for the sponsors because, again, they're now having a hard time understanding where does the expertise sit, and where, a CDMO or a company who is in oral solids may be looking at 3 to 5 CDMOs. They're now having to look at 7 to 10 because, again, the water is so muddy, and they need to understand the different pieces that come in, because it's not just about finding a early, a vector, or finding a process that fits with you. It's all the pieces from beginning to end that matter. Again, back to that intimacy, where the intimacy is more internal. As you get to the later stage clinical, the intimacy becomes external because you're dealing with clients, especially if it's ex vivo, you've got patient, material coming in, managed and manufactured within the CDMO, and then back to the patient. And that's a very, very detailed, intimate, time-sensitive process that you have to have in place. And it's got to be, forward thinking of understanding how to manage that. So it is an ever-changing landscape that you just have to continue to analyze and look at and understand where to pivot your focus. One thing that we didn't touch on with people was, when I talked about the BD, was, is the structure appropriate for what they're looking at right now? Meaning, is the geography and the territory set appropriately for the number of BDs that a client that a CDMO might have, right? And so that balance is really important, because sometimes more shots on goal doesn't mean more business. And that's a lot, you'll hear that a lot, that language, because the shots on goal have to be meaningful and appropriate back to the research of the client and making sure you understand and that it fits your business, right? So you need to know where that potential is in the space of where you're looking at. So North America, Boston, San Francisco, two very big hubs, for business. But what is the potential there versus, Texas or the Southwest or the Southeast, and so that kind of analysis piece comes into play too, to make sure that you're focusing in the right areas. But it's a crowded space right now, and it can be confusing for the sponsor, and it's complex and difficult for the CDMO because there's so much competition. And how do you differentiate yourself from some of that stuff?
That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that last one up of, kind of right sizing the territories for the BDs, because this isn't about, cold calling into a list.
Yes.
This is building real deep, lasting relationships with people, with organizations out there. That's much more time consuming for a BD than just
It is.
calling. Yeah.
It is. It's a lot more time consuming, and the research aspect is so valuable that, I do call it's the difference between cold calling and warm calling. If you can write an email that's very targeted to a specific person's research and technology, and actually let them know how you can support based on the right fit, they're going to look at that very differently than, hey, we're a cell and gene therapy CDMO, and we do this long list of things. Can we talk? It's you need to approach it very meaningfully and very intentionally in how you manage that.
We have talked about so many things, and your ability, you are very agile in how you jump from each of these topics, and just you're a master of them. So thank you very much for doing that. You do that very well. So one final question. It may be the most difficult. It certainly might be the most challenging set of conditions that a lot of listeners face. So whether they're chief commercial officers, heads of sales, or heads of marketing. So they're listening to you and go, of course, yeah, that is what I need to do, and the lights are coming on, and deep inside they've been thinking about this, but they're working in a company that does it differently. They're so far away from the model that you're describing, and they don't even know how to begin to change the minds of people working around them to do it differently. What advice would you give them?
Oh, that one's so hard. It is, Perry, because believe me, I've been there, and that's the hard part. The way the way I picture it in my head is we're always trying to push a boulder up a hill, to get people to change. And it's back to that other vision of everybody rowing in the same direction, right? So it can happen, but it's tedious, and a lot of it I'll start from the BD perspective. A lot of it is just is being proactive and making some of it happen. Meaning, if there's not an RFP to proposal process, then talking to whoever that needs to be, whether it be the VP of the business development group, or getting in discussions with the proposal writer or with the project manager. How about we talk about a better system, or how can we collaborate a little bit better? Is there information that I'm not giving you that would make it easier for you to be able to write the proposal? Are there questions that I need to maybe ask differently of the client that will help gain this kind of information to get it back to you? When is it that we need to have this information in this process, for the proposal generation? Because the proposals in particular is always important, because the quickest one you get there, you want to have your turnaround time, be quick there. But the other is talk about the technical side of things, right? Put a half an hour call on once a week with somebody in development. And I'm talking somebody who, works on the bench, because when you go through site visits, right? And you're walking through their space, you see these people, and there are people who are working for the company that you work for too. And you want to know their name. And you might also want to know, hey, are you married? Do you have any kids? Do you play sports? What do you do? What's your life, what's your life like, and engage in that, because that's what then builds, the cultural piece of of understanding and appreciating the people that you work for, and that it is a full-on effort. So that's one thing I always say to BD that I've had in the past is, make a call, especially because, again, we're remote, we're always remote. And that is often a problem, and why we get the perception that we get. But when you go to the site, I always say go a day early, to prep. That's a necessity, actually. Go a day earlier to prep so that you can communicate to everybody in a very, appropriate, meaningful, collaborative way of what you need them to do or say or help support in this client meeting. But also stay a day or two to engage with some of these people that are in operations, or take the project manager out that you just want to program with, or set a meeting with the CFO for a half an hour just to ask a couple questions about what are their current issues that they're working on, or anything that we need to be concerned about, or things that we should be looking for. So a lot of it is just proactively drawing those lines for yourself that then can become maybe a common cadence for others within the organization.
What great advice. It is hard to do, but what you're talking about, such great advice, winning hearts and minds. Just,
Yeah.
it all boils down to something that you emphasize, communications. But like at a tactical level, if you're going to do a site visit, stay an extra couple days.
Yeah.
That is beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Such strong
Because
advice.
we're not there to go get a cup of coffee and run into a bunch of people and have a chat for 15 minutes in between breaks of a meeting. I mean, you're not there on the normal cadence. We're always invisible to the internal colleagues, and so it has to be very intentional and meaningful, and make it meaningful, right? In a sense that you're developing those relationships.
Yeah, great advice. So I think we're going to have to wrap this up. Any closing comments, insights, advice that you would have for listeners?
I just think that I've so enjoyed this conversation. And I do think that at the core of a lot of what we talked about is just so important for the success of some of these organizations. And yes, I am extremely passionate about this because I've had a lot of this in my career. But when I got into cell and gene therapy, it became so evident. And again, I think I shared it's the reason that I pivoted to that space, is that this web building within the organization, and that's kind of visional that I want to start to maybe play with, building the web between these four very specific lenses, and cross-pollinating and making sure those pieces are there, and that there's processes in place to make sure that they happen, and that the technical aligns with the things that the client needs, and all of those types of stuff are so important for the success within cell and gene therapy, very much now, and then specifically for the future, as these technologies start to grow and they start solving the problems of scalability and potency and yield and all these things, that impurity, that right now are an issue that they're trying to move towards. So I know it can happen. It's going to happen, but I think if we can get some of these concepts and thoughts out now earlier and start building the foundations for these companies that are blossoming all over the place, and getting people rowing in the same direction, and having this foundational piece for success, that we'll get there quicker, is my feel.
Heather, thank you so much. And great capping it off with some hope, positive vision of the future. If our listeners, I'm going to just, if you are recognizing some of the problems that Heather has spoken about, and you want to be part of, you want your organization to look like some of the things that she described, I would encourage you to reach out. We need you, Heather. We need you in our CDMOs, whether they're in cell and gene therapy or not. We could really value a lot of your help. So how can our listeners contact you?
So LinkedIn is the best way to right now. And first of all, thank you, Perry. I really appreciate that comment, because again, I feel very passionate about this. I love doing this. I love helping and driving that enthusiasm, and that there is hope to grow the industry in a good way. But LinkedIn, as far as connecting with me, absolutely. And I am, sort of building the concept of a consulting approach. I believe I can help, companies get there in that this first, 3-month period of trying to establish these things and put these processes in place and make sure these systems and people are connecting in the right way. So that's just a vision and an opportunity that I'll just throw out there. But I'm happy to speak with anybody who wants to talk further about some of these concepts and ideas for themselves.
I've been talking to Heather Nielsen Sugrue, and Heather, thank you very much for taking the time to be part of the Trailblazers.
Thank you so much, Perry. It's been an absolute joy. I really appreciate the invitation back. It's been fun.